Hello, it's Ted Bradshaw. This video today is about a core skill that you're going to use during CBT, which is about trying to understand how you feel. That might be quite a big question, actually, and that's the whole point of doing this, is to try and break it down a little bit and try and simplify it, try and get to the heart of what's actually going on. We're going to talk through in this video why we do it, so what the principles are, how you do it, and we're going to run through an example, and then some of the barriers that you might find and how to overcome them. A couple of tips about that. So let's talk about the process first. The whole idea of this is the way you feel, so this is an assumption within CBT, the way you feel is a combination of what's going on, the situation, and how it's been interpreted. I've got the word thoughts here, but that's not quite the best word sometimes, because it's not always feels like conscious thought. So for example, if you have a fear, if you're afraid of a dog, for example, because you've been bitten by a dog in the past maybe, it's unlikely that when there's a dog, you'll think to yourself, oh look, there's a dog, it's got some sharp teeth, it might bite me. It might be more of a general sense, like you've got this feeling that there's danger, that the dog might attack. So asking, what are my thoughts, might not be the right thing to ask. Either way, the assumption is, it's not just the situation, it's how it's been interpreted that drives how you feel. That provokes a physical reaction, and that drives your behaviour. That's the idea, and that's what we're going to try and break down. Let's use an example. So, this is a small example from me recently. Always better to use an actual example, a live one, something that really works, even though it's a small one, I would say. So, the first difficulty that people come across is, well, I don't know what's going through my head. I don't know what's going on there. And one of the things that's going on there is all this happens like that. And actually, if you start by asking what was going through my head, you might find that hard. My suggestion would be start with how you feel and the situation, because those bits you probably know. For me, as if I'm going to do that, I know I'm feeling anxious. That's what was going on. This is from a few days ago. I was feeling anxious, and for me, what was going on physically, typically with me when I'm feeling anxious, I feel tense, but I also feel my stomach going a bit. What was going on at the time was it was all the way home from a weekend away, and then when I got back as well. So I'd been away with people I'd never been away with before, people that I know well, but who I'd not been away with. And we were sorting out the money. So on the way back, I was divvying up like, okay, such and such has spent this, such and such has spent this, so we just need to even that up. So the question, or the way in, once you've identified what's going on and how you're feeling, is what is it about this that's making you feel this? So what is it about the idea or the situation that you're coming home from this weekend with these guys and you're divvying up the money? What is it about that that's making you feel anxious? Well, I'm worried that I've annoyed them. So that's one way in. Another way in might be just what's going through your head, or are there any images that's coming to mind? Sometimes it's not sentences, it's more I'm perhaps playing situations out in my head. Maybe I'm thinking, what am I going to say? Or should I have said this? That kind of stuff. So I'm worried that I've annoyed them. The next thing we want to do is we want to dig a little deeper than that, because it's not the first thing. We want to keep asking until we get to the bit that feels really scary. So it's already a little bit anxiety provoking. I don't want to annoy anybody. But the question I'm going to ask myself is, what is it about the idea that you've annoyed them that makes you feel anxious? Picked up the wrong one. I'm worried they won't like me. That's my answer to that. So then I'm going to ask the same question again. What is it about the idea that they're annoyed with you and they don't like you that makes you feel anxious? Well, I'm worried that I'm going to be left out. And this sort of sense that they're not going to want to hang around with me anymore, and they're just going to go off and do it on their own. What is it about that that makes you feel anxious? And if I'm honest, this is what comes up. I'll be on my own. So straight away, I can kind of hear in my head one of the barriers coming up. So one thing you might notice when you try and do this is there'll be part of you that goes, don't be ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous, can't be that. That's a ridiculous thing to think. Obviously, you're not going to be on your own if these guys don't want to hang around with you anymore. You've got other friends. Or it's even ridiculous that they're going to be annoyed with you. What that is there's part of you that feels anxious, and there's part of you that's really logical and reasonable that can see why you shouldn't be, or can see another way of looking at it. Unfortunately, that bit, the logical bit, isn't the bit we need right now. We'll use it later on, but it isn't the bit we need right now. If you really want to understand the way that you feel, the bit you need to pay attention to is the bit that is scared and that maybe isn't being logical or reasonable or rational. It's not the point about whether or not whether you're supposed to think that way. The point is, we're trying to work out how you do feel. So recognise the logical bit and set it to one side and see if you can pay attention to the bit that isn't being logical. That's the bit we need to understand. The next principle I want to talk you through is, well, what if there's more than one emotion? So, for example, later down the line, after I've been anxious for a while, I started to feel frustrated as well. That came with similar symptoms to this. And when I asked myself, well, what is it that was making you feel frustrated? It was this. It was, come on, Ted, you're a therapist. And you're too old for this. How long has this been going on for now? Come on, you should be over this by now. That kind of thing. Totally unhelpful, but that's what it was. I was feeling frustrated with myself, and that's why. So what you might notice when you try and do this is it's come out super logical, super organised from me. But what you might notice the first few times you try this is it doesn't come out like that. Maybe it's a big old bunch of thoughts. When you ask what's going through your head, there's like 50 things. If that happens, go with it. Just write down everything that's in your head and then see if you can ask yourself, well, which of these thoughts makes me feel this emotion the strongest? If there's only one emotion, that'll be really easy. If there's two emotions or three emotions, what you want to ask is, which of these thoughts connects most with each of these emotions? So for example, I'm worried that I'll be left out and I'll be on my own makes me feel anxious. But the idea that I'm a therapist and I should be over this by now doesn't make me feel anxious, it makes me feel frustrated. So one way you could do it is write out all your thoughts and just take a different highlighter colour for each emotion and just highlight them. And then you can start doing this process of, what is it about that makes you feel so anxious? Or what is it about that makes you feel so frustrated? And the idea is we're just going to get to the point where I was feeling anxious because of these set of thoughts. I was feeling frustration and this was going on in my head about that. I was feeling sad and that was what this was going on. There is one more thing about how you get to this thought, about how do you know how far to go. So you will know you've reached the right thought when either you've got no answer left. So if you ask yourself, what is it that makes you feel anxious about being on your own? And you go, I don't know, that's just it, I just feel anxious about that. You're probably far enough down the path. Or if it starts to tip over into a different emotion. So actually here, when I say out loud, yeah, I'm worried that I'm going to be left on my own, I actually notice that it starts to change from anxiety into a bit of sadness. And that's a bit of a sign that I've reached the end of the road there. I've worked out what's making me feel really anxious. It then starts to change into something else. I can stop. That's the idea. So, next up is behaviour. All right, I've understood why I'm feeling anxious, what it is that's going through my mind. Let's talk about behaviour. Typically, particularly with anxiety, falls into two categories. It'll either be solving behaviour or it'll be avoiding behaviour. So, what I mean by that is the anxious response, the anxiety response is there to deal with threats. So tigers, for example. And all your body wants to drive you to do is get rid of the tiger, get rid of the threat, solve it, or leave. Your body's not going to want to relax until the tiger's gone or you've gone. That's what solving or avoiding means. So, I'm worried they're annoyed with me. I'm worried they're going to kind of leave me on my own, not invite me again. So the first behaviour I noticed in myself was being extra nice. Overcompensating. So that happens loads with anxiety. So I don't know, let's say you're worried about your job or you're worried about whether or not your boss thinks you're doing a good job. You might overcompensate, you might overwork. That's what I was doing here. trying to be extra nice. Second thing I noticed myself doing was testing the water. So I'm worried they're annoyed with me, so I'll check, basically. And the way I'll do that is I'll send them messages. I'll send them a couple of messages just to see if they respond. Because if they respond, and I can tell from that they're not annoyed with me, that'll be okay. Only problem with that is, of course, if they respond in a nice way, my brain goes, yeah, but they could just be being nice. Or, if they don't respond, I'm just going, oh, I knew it. So that then leaves me also, another behaviour I was doing, was checking my messages. So there I was, testing the water, trying to be super nice, trying to just be light-hearted. I'll make jokes and send them a couple of messages just to see if they respond. And then I'll sit there and I'll refresh. I'll check my phone every 30 seconds or so just to make sure and see if they've replied. So of course, I'm stuck in a bit of an impossible situation because no matter what they say, I don't feel convinced. So actually, I'm still left with this feeling of anxiety. The target hasn't totally gone away. And that means that I feel like I have to avoid. And the type of avoiding behaviours I noticed in myself were the classic ones, really, which is distraction. So I noticed I was on my phone a lot. I was either checking my messages or I was on social media or scrolling through the news, whatever. Something that just takes me mentally out of the picture. This is really helpful because right now what you'll notice at the beginning is you'll be spotting what you're doing, but you won't know what to do any differently about. But this will be the blueprint or a way in for a couple of the key ways in which we make a difference in CBT. Once you've gathered this and you've done it over a few situations, the first thing we'll be looking for is, are there patterns? So if I was to do this over a week or two, I know that all of the things that I feel anxious about typically boil down to worrying that I've offended somebody or they don't like me. That's what it typically boils down to. And that's going to be really helpful because now I know that. Now I've got something specific to target and to work on. It's this that I tend to worry about. What can I do about that? It might be that understanding what the physical stuff is helps because there are a few different things we can do within CBT to help you with the physical symptoms too. And with behaviour, one thing that's really helpful about behaviour, about noticing what you're doing, is asking yourself about the intention. So all of these behaviours, the intention is to make me feel better. If I can convince myself, if I can get an answer or a response from them that convinces me that they like me, I don't have to worry anymore. If I can distract myself successfully, I don't feel anxious anymore while I'm distracted. That totally works until I have to stop distracting myself. And then the problem is still there. So the intention is to take away my anxiety. Asking myself the question, is it doing what it's intended to do? The answer is kind of part yes, but part no. Actually, I spent the rest of that day distracted. I was on my phone, checking my messages, refreshing things, and what I wasn't doing was present with my family, which probably would have been slightly better for me. In terms of techniques we use with thoughts, there's loads of different things we can do, but the most important part, that's for covering at a later date, and the most important part at this stage is just understanding how you feel now. If you can understand it and you can identify some themes, it's going to be a really good starting point for setting off, finding some ways of thinking differently or seeing things differently or reacting differently. That's what we're after. I hope that's helpful.